Welcome to the overview of PCI DSS version 4.0 client-side requirements. We'll be talking about best practices and resources to guide you on your journey, because criminals aren't waiting till 2025, and neither should you. The PCI DSS Council recently released a revised version of the Data Security Standard 4.0, which delineates the minimum security requirements that merchants must meet when they store, process, and transmit cardholder data. My name is Edward O'Connell, and I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at F5. In this video, I'll go over how digital skimming and mage card attacks are conducted and why they're successful, why PCI DSS client-side protection requirements that were added to handle these are important, and what the best practices and resources available to guide you in meeting these requirements and the steps that you can take now. So let's talk about the evolution of digital skimming and mage card attacks. And because let's understand what the drivers are for them and how digital skimming and these mage card attacks are conducted and why they're successful. Today's modern applications are very complex. They're built using a collection of JavaScript libraries. A lot of the app processing takes place in the web browser, where forms containing credit card and PII information are processed. It's common for an app to load over 20 third-party scripts as part of the user experience. These scripts were developed to accelerate development, improve performance, and create better digital app experiences, and to be self-contained on the client side. This has resulted in the industry now heavily dependent on using these third-party script components that live, again, on the client side. As you can see, there's scores of third-party libraries for payment, chatbot, analytics, mapping, social, advertising, and helper libraries. This creates a real challenge for those that need to be able to track and be able to manage these. Compounding matters even further is 70% of the JavaScript libraries in these web apps are from third-party suppliers, such as a marketing script. And many of these third-party scripts contain scripts from other third-party libraries, such as jQuery.js. And the scripts embedded in the scripts make it extremely difficult to understand where they exist and what's running within your environment. The shadow code also makes it nearly impossible to keep track of who placed them there, and when were they updated, and when were they added, and when were the changes made. This enabled attackers to exploit vulnerability because they know you might shut down one malicious script, but there can be a script within a script that you may not be aware of, and that they can easily go back into and manipulate before you know it, you're aware of it. Or they might even use a previously verified script with the library unknowingly that got updated with malicious code, because you are not properly monitoring the updated changes. Client-side attacks are lucrative and easy for criminals because they are leveraging the lack of visibility on the client side of the transaction to their advantage. This enables them to compromise e-commerce platform sites, library code repositories, and S3 buckets by injecting malicious code into the supply chain that these web pages rely on. As you can see here, there's just a few of the successful client-side attacks. Many of these I'm sure you've heard of. And these attacks are typically done with these following goals in mind: stealing confidential data, credential theft, payment card skimming. Other goals can include gaining complete control of the site, stealing credentials to take over accounts, stealing credit card information that they can sell in cybercrime forums, or manipulate the site to hijack the customer journey completely. These types of attacks are on the rise. A new attack is being identified roughly every 16 minutes. Industry consortia and regulation bodies are calling attention to this problem. For example, OWASP has published their top 10 client-side attacks. They're perfectly aligned with the PCI Council's guidance that they've included in their new recommendations. PCI Council has also included thoughtful guidance in the new v4 recommendations on many of these attacks. You can find out more about these client-side risks by visiting the OWASP website at the URL at the bottom of the screen. Client-side attacks are costly as they ultimately lead to a breach. The average cost of a breach, according to the IBM security report, is $4.24 million. The report did note that costs are rising, but they also did note that if you have, for some customers, if they have a strong security posture, then the costs are not rising as fast. Even a single line of code in a software supply chain attack can be devastating for a business, as it results in more than just a security problem. The long-term business consequences can be significant: compliance failure, regulatory fines, reputational damage, and loss of customers. The business impact of addressing this not addressing this now is real, and that's why you should start to implement PCI requirements now and not wait till the 2025 deadline. So let's talk about let's talk about now the new PCI DSS client-side protection requirements. The industry is raising awareness of the rise in risk of client-side attacks and calling for companies to take action to defend against these attacks. The issues we just discussed are exactly the problem that PCI DSS version 4.0 is attempting to address with the new PCI DSS requirements, 6.43 and 11.61. 6.3, new requirement for management of all payment page scripts that are loaded and executed in the customer's web browser. 11.61, new requirements to deploy change and tamper detection mechanism to alert for unauthorized modifications to the HTTP headers and content of the payment pages as received by the customer's web browser. Both of these requirements are currently just a best practice until March 31st, 2025. So let's talk about skimming. When hackers insert a malicious script on an e-commerce website, they are conducting a digital version of the physical attacks where an attacker puts a physical device on a fuel pump. The goal is to steal personally identifiable information, or more specifically, payment account data, so they can use it fraudulently later. In this diagram, you can see that it's not to the merchant's e-commerce site that it was initially compromised, but a script provided by a third party, which was allowed on the site's payment page. Attackers use these scripts to upload their own malicious code to capture the cardholder data from the customer's web browser. That's the client side that you've heard me talk about earlier. Often these scripts are for simple functions such as chat that are useful for customer relations but have nothing to do with the payment and should not be on the payment page. Once loaded into the customer's web browser, the skimming script accesses the account information entered by the cardholder and transmits that to the attacker's site. Often the payment account data still goes off to the payment processor, so the merchant and processor don't even know a compromise has occurred. Traditional server-side defenses are no longer sufficient alone to protect your customers, because web apps today are very different from the past. Security defenses such as web app firewalls, bot detection, and SIM tools do a good job to control and monitor web traffic entering the data center, but do nothing to protect data on the client side, which leaves a security gap. And because of this, criminals have adapted their strategies to attack your customer's web browser. In a recent F5 Labs report, we investigated this. We noted the diversity of malicious form jacking scripts has grown over 20x, with an increase in the variety of access, masquerading, and exfiltration techniques used. And we found that in 80% of the web exploits, there was some variation of form jacking using Magecart and its variants. Most of the injection attacks we monitored were placing malicious skimmer scripts to harvest payment information. Another interesting thing we saw was an increase in repeat form jacking, where many organizations were compromised by the same attack multiple times in succession. Criminals would wait for the incident response to end and then hit them again, illustrating the dangers of declaring victory too early and the consequences of not having proper monitoring, alerting, and rapid blocking tools. Also, it's important to remember that even if a website does not collect personal data, criminals can still inject malicious code to add new fields into existing forms to trick site visitors into providing such information. And we're seeing an increase in attacks injected into the process flows. Criminals know payment ecosystems probably better than most people in the e-com industry, and they're always looking for new ways to exploit vulnerabilities in the process flow. For example, if you outsource your payment processing to a third-party vendor, typically the customers are redirected to this third-party vendor to enter their credit card information to complete the transaction. Because most of the skimmers can't access the third-party vendor web pages to obtain the card user's information, the criminal will do this instead. Have the skimmer inject a fake credit card form for the user to complete so they can capture that information before they're redirected. When the user clicks on the fake checkout or submit payment, the skimmer sends all of the collected data to a command and control server that they control. And then it still allows the user to continue with the legitimate payment by redirecting to the real third-party vendor payment page. Even recently, we've seen criminals injecting malicious scripts directly into the payment processor site payment gateway modules to harvest information to avoid detection. So the first requirement is to prevent unauthorized malicious scripts from being on the payment page. Ideally, the only scripts on the payment page should be those specifically related to the function of taking the payment. Details about this requirement. Merchants need to manage all of the payment page scripts so that the unauthorized ones don't end up in the customer's web browsers. 3 controls. First of all, merchants need to implement a method to confirm all of the payment page scripts are authorized. Second, merchants implement a method to assure that the integrity of each script. And third, merchants must maintain an inventory of all scripts with written justification as to why each is necessary. The guidance column in the standard requirement for 6.4.3 includes a lot of good guidance and helps to explain how to do this. The second new e-commerce requirement is to deploy a change and tamper detection mechanism that alerts personnel to unauthorized modifications, including indicators of compromise, changes, additions, and deletions to HTTP headers and content of the payment page received by the consumer's browser. And that the mechanism functions are performed at least once every 7 days or periodically as defined by the entity's TRA. This is performed according to the regulation 12.3.1. Important to note, this requirement for e-commerce skimming detection requires merchants to deploy a mechanism that detects changes or indications of malicious activity on the payment pages. The only place to do this is in the customer's browser as the page is being constructed and the scripting language is being interpreted. This does not mean that the merchant installs software in the customer's systems or browsers. It does mean that the merchant detects and prevents unauthorized skip activities while constructing the payment page. Here, again, the details and examples of how to do this in the requirements are in the guidance column, which is standard requirement for 11.6.1. Again, simply put, attackers aren't waiting till 2025, and neither should you. Planning to implement PCI DSS to mitigate client-side attacks should be a priority today. Adding a couple boxes to the diagram that we showed earlier of the skimming attack, we can see where the new PCI requirements will help stop these attacks. The checks put in place to manage the payment page scripts prevents an unauthorized script from being injected into the payment page in the first place. So when the cardholder enters their payment account information, that info is not captured by the attacker. And if by chance, if there is a script on that payment page, the second requirement for skimming detection and reporting can block and report the loading of a script from an invalid source and stop the sending of the account data to the attacker's site. In this case, you can see the use of a content security policy, such as a script RC directive, in combination with a report to directive. So how to get started? It is recommended to consider leveraging the NIST cybersecurity framework, as it will help you simplify your implementation and your internal communication for your master cybersecurity and compliance strategy. The number one thing you can do is conduct a security strategy assessment, which includes assessing risk and compliance, evaluating existing security governance, including data privacy, third-party risk, and IT regulatory compliance. When you go through this assessment, you should be able to look for vulnerabilities in your people, processes, and technology to better understand the potential areas of compromise. In regards to people, do you have the right level of access control? Have your people been properly trained? Process. Do you have a clearly documented process for certifying, engaging, and monitoring third-party scripts? Technology. Do you have the right tools to inspect and detect when your site is being modified or compromised? Another framework that you might want to explore is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, along with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. So let's talk about identity. Here are the basics to start with. Start with an inventory audit of your scripts. Bottom line is, if a third-party script is on your site has a vulnerability and you're not aware of it, you're unable to patch it, opening the door for an attacker to exploit. So start with creating an internal audit of the inventory of all legitimate scripts that are used, who owns them, who authorizes them, what are they used for, and how they're being maintained. That will allow you to address the 6.4.3 requirements. Once you have a baseline audit, you need to ensure that you have a sustainable third-party risk management governance process for adding, monitoring, and maintaining scripts to ensure the integrity of each and every script and why it is necessary. Think of it as a software bill of materials, SBOM, for your scripts, and be ensured to include scripts added through tag managers. From here, think of the ways you can minimize the number of scripts on all pages, more importantly, the payment and checkout pages, as PCI Cancel recommends. The client-side protections you implement should be able to provide you with a list of all the scripts that they are taking action on in your web pages. Ideally, some with some level of behavioral information on what the script is doing and simplify future audits. Protect. This is part of the requirement for 6.4.3. Keeping inventory is just the first step. Verifying that each script is authorized to execute is also crucial in preventing client-side attacks. You should take a zero-trust mindset. This will allow you to control who is adding new scripts or modifying existing ones. And remember, many of the attacks are due to poor authentication and authorization controls. So consider using a least privileged access principle and apply multi-factor requirements. And as part of your authorization process, you should no longer allow changes to go live without being properly approved, especially for those scripts that are established for outbound network connections and perform sensitive reads from fields. The zero trust approach of continuously monitoring these scripts behaviors over time will allow you to detect deviations from the norm, regardless how embedded they live in the JavaScript supply chain. Detect client-side attacks is a part of the 11.6.1 PCI DSS specification. You should apply client-side attack surface monitoring, detection, and alerting that can automatically scan your site and continuously monitor, detect, and alert when a new script is being added and an existing one modified. This includes real-time detection of first and nth-party potential compromises by examining each JavaScript code, page deviation from the original behavior, signs of exfiltration, and malicious network traffic generated. Having timely alerts with customizable levels of enforcement will allow you to automatically block ones that are known to be malicious. You should take a look at your existing tools and explore new ways of augmenting them. PCI does allow for tools like sub-resource integrity, SRI, to conduct integrity checks to ensure a script was not tampered with, and content security policy, CSP, to limit locations browsers can load a script from and send data to. Also, tag management tools still have a place, but we've started to see a spike of malicious inline JavaScript code injected into the website by exploiting a vulnerability tools impersonating apps like Google Tag Manager. While sub-resource integrity, content security policy, and tag managers still have value, they can be challenging to manage over multiple pages and no longer sufficient by themselves to protect today's constantly changing modern applications and attack. This is why you should explore augmenting your traditional tools with more modern client-side capabilities that include examining JavaScript code and malicious network traffic generated. Respond. You should also consider establishing a rapid mitigation strategy to quickly block network calls that are inappropriately exfiltrating data. By having a centralized location where your team can quickly review script changes and alerts, this enables them to either create an automated response or manually use a one-click mitigation strategy to quickly respond. Recover. If a merchant is a victim of a digital skimming attack, they should immediately implement an incident response plan that they already have in place. Ideally, the plan is aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework, includes such actions as secure operations to quickly protect systems and fix vulnerabilities, mobilize the breach team to prevent additional data loss, identify what data was compromised and what compliance regulations it falls under. An example would be GDPR. Identify which customers have been impacted and quickly activate your communication strategy towards them. And finally, ensure you conduct a post-incident assessment. Remember, security is never done. Even when you think you're done, you're not. You must always protect your business and ensure cyber resiliency. In summary, although digital skimming attacks are pervasive, there are things you can do to protect your organization and your customers to provide a secure, fast, and convenient online experience. And you can fill the security gap created by modern apps by applying PCI best practices. In doing that, not only will you mitigate digital skimming and form jacking attacks, but you will also prevent malicious actors from exfiltrating your customers' data and protect against account takeover. I can't overemphasize the importance of implementing the recommendations by PCI DSS now to help strengthen your security, mitigate the risk for both your organization and your customers. Make sure you visit the PCI DSS Council's 4.0 Resource Hub, as there's a wealth of resources there to help you understand the requirements. You'll find the URL at the bottom of the screen. F5 is a PCI DSS service provider, delivers security solutions for both server-side and client-side applications. To find out more, visit f5.com.